All right, so we're gonna get going. Not a lot of people are here. I guess one more than when I started my class earlier this morning. Everybody seems to have forgotten everything, but we only have 2 weeks left after this, because we're squishing the last 2 chapters up. So we have chapter 12, social psychology this week, and then we have personality next week, and then we have chapters 14 and 15, which are psychological disorders and therapies. We have in the last week, and then you guys have like your dead week, and then your final is the 18th. You can, if you want, come in, take it, or you can take it online. I just have to have it done by that day. So chapter 12 is social psychology, and there is so much to go on. We're going to try to get through these first 4 points today, and then we'll go social cognition, the rest for Wednesday. I'm a social psychologist, so I'm a little bit prejudiced, but it's really, social psychology covers pretty much everything. We're interested in interacting in the interactions between people, between individuals, and between individuals and their groups. Everything from your family unit and why we interact in intimate relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, to violence and aggression at the interpersonal level between just a few people, and then at, war. War too is social psychology. So it covers just about everything. Your text, the scientific study of how a person's behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and influence are influenced by social groups. Every social group we have, it's everything from your family to where you work, to your school, to your online environments. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about that today. My shorter definition, as you guys know, I always like a shorter one: the study of the causes, types, and consequences of human interaction. Social psychologists examine the relationship of the individual with the group, as well as between individuals. Social Psych Network is just a website dedicated to social psychologists. I already have this link up on the page that's, participate in research and psychology. You can find a lot of online studies here, a lot of information about social psychology. Okay, with that said, let's start with group behavior. So group behavior is just how we act within our groups, as well as intergroup behavior, or so how groups interact with each other. And we'll start with social influence, and that's just how other people influence our thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So directly influence, or indirectly, directly, as in we're actually having a direct interaction. Indirectly is that we see how they act. We'll see more about that in a minute. The better definition: the process by which an individual, so an individual person, a person's attitude, beliefs, or behavior are modified by the presence or actions of others, okay? And we're going to talk about 3 main ways that this happens: conformity, groupthink, and group polarization. So conformity is not obedience. It's not doing what you're told. It's not compliance. It's just changing your behavior and attitudes and beliefs to match that of other people, modeling your behavior on the behavior of others. So the conformity is really strongest when we're talking about your own in-group. So we talk about in-groups more than once this semester, but I think the last time we were talking about gender identity formation or something like that. So your in-group is just the people like you, right? You're more likely to conform to the way to the beliefs, etc., of your in-group than others, right? Because you care about them, you identify with them, you believe they're your people. Conformity happens when it's with your people. You're not being told to do it, you just do it, right? It's modeling. So a real famous experiment that shows how strong this can be, even when it's not your in-group, when it's people you don't even know, was ASH 1956. What happened here, there's a video, we're not going to watch it, it's kind of long and I got a lot of stuff to cover. They had people come in and sit around a table, and they were asked to match 2 lines, or different experiments. I'm going to talk about one here. And Participants went along with the group 37% of the time. What does that mean? More Confederates. Confederates are people who work for the experimenter, right? The people who are actually in on it and know what's happening, right? The participants are just the people who come in, right? So the subjects, right? So what happened is they were shown a line, and then they asked which of these three lines is the same as the line, the standard line, the one you're supposed to be comparing it to, okay? So which one of these is the same as the one of the standard line you're right? 1, 2, or 3? 2. It should be no doubt, you guys, it's number 2. 2 is the same as that line, right? But what happened is they would, depending on where they start, so they go around the room, they're around the table saying, well, which matches? One person say 2, 2, 2, right? Everybody should say 2. But what they did to test whether or not people conform is Confederates would say 1 or 3, right? They would say a different one. And depending on how many Confederates claimed lied first, the participant would lie as well, or just say, would agree with the Confederates. So say the Confederates, like 3 people said 3, even though it's number 2, the participant would just like 3. Why? They begin to doubt their own perceptions, okay? They weren't being told, they weren't being pressured. All they're being told is we're gonna make sure everybody agrees on the stimuli. So which one is yeah, 37% of the time. And that depended on how many Confederates. If just a few, it was less likely. If 3, like 1, not so likely. 3, they're more likely to say the wrong answer, just to be in agreement. That's conformity, right? So groupthink. Groupthink occurs when people place more importance on maintaining group cohesiveness than assessing the facts of the problem. I love these definitions. What this means is when people are more interested in the group getting along, maintaining the group dynamic, rather than actually bringing up or facing difficult topics or difficult things that are likely to rock the boat or disrupt the boat, okay? It happens, more likely to happen, when a homogeneous, so all the same, highly cohesive group is more interested in maintaining unanimity or being all in agreement than in evaluating all the alternatives and options. And we're going to watch a little video on that in a minute, but first I'm going to show you characteristics. This is just from your textbook, but it's really useful. Invulnerability, what makes it more likely a groupthink happen? Believing that your group is going to succeed no matter what, okay? Rationalization, okay, they rationalize not paying attention to all the different things they should be paying attention to. Lack of introspection, they don't question their own behavior or the behavior of those in their group because they believe they're above that, they can't be immoral. They stereotype others, okay, pressure, they pressure each other not to rock the boat. They don't want to express opinions that differ, so not wanting to show disagreement. Self-deception, they believe that they all agree, okay? Insularity, they're just protecting that group from information from the outside. Okay, so let's look at this video. I'm not going to watch all of it, just going to watch a little bit of it. I quite like it. And Betty Deanna just came in. I can't hear that. Oh, you guys hear that? Yeah? Let's see.
The eventually were distractions. That's the main pictures. Referring to the ideas and patterns. That's like society. So in this sense, a mean is any concept that is spread by the internet.
Oh, that's worse.
These significant bylaws is the ability to rank out.
Can you guys hear this? Not really. I know, I can't either. And you guys online? Probably not either. I can't even hear it myself. I'm sitting right in front of the computer. Let me try a little bit more.
And in recent years, one of the most common anti-vaccination. The anti-vaxxers are the result of they're basically a group that just makes scientific methods, referring to indulging their own personal anecdotes and refuting all other outside evidence, propagating this belief in some massive conspiracy instead. So, what is the unifying theme between the negatives that allow groups like the anti-vaxxers to proliferate and the kind of things that we see in our social communication? The answer to this question can be found in a term known as groupthink. So what exactly is groupthink? Well, like many other socio-political words, it comes from one of the most important ingredients in any high school English class, and that would be George Orwell's 1984. So 1984 is a very famous dystopian novel, and in it sets up this totalitarian government that is willing to use any means necessary to exert control and its citizens. It can manipulate information and do a lot of other unethical things. And one of the tools that it uses to subjugate its citizens is by creating a new form of vocabulary called newspeak. So newspeak is a controlled language, and it restricts our freedom of thought, our freedom of speech, because the government in 1984 simply doesn't create words or concepts they don't support, such as liberty or resistance or rebellion. But one of the words that they have created, and that always surprise you, is groupthink. So what the government intends to accomplish in 1984 with groupthink is to convince the citizens to fall in love with each other, kind of lost that. To just say, oh, look at how polite and being your fellow citizens are. Why can't you be just like that? And quite frankly, in his novel, George Orwell has created a very effective method. For groupthink to be applied successfully, we need to satisfy two conditions. The first is a desire for harmony in the community, and the second is a lack of objectivity. And this convinces a group of members to turn their gaze inwards and reject all other outside evidence. Another development novel that is similar to 1984 and also utilizes groupthink effectively is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. So these books are very similar. They have a lot of themes of comparing and contrasting a lot. And it also consists of a totalitarian government as citizens. Except in this case, the citizens actually want to be oppressed. What the society in Brave New World has accomplished is that through technological advancements, since this is a futuristic dystopia, they've granted citizens access to forms of entertainment that offer instant gratification. For example, they can, at any time, they can watch 40 full-body experiential movies. They can take doctored drugs that are so powerful that they not be without for days at a time, and that literally taking one's referred to as medication. And many other forms of entertainment. So what's happening is that society is completely oriented around the pursuit of pleasure. And that's how it satisfies the first condition, the desire for harmony. Since everyone's already happy, nobody needs to make a status quo. Related to that is the second condition of the lack of objectivity. Since everyone is already satisfied, nobody wants to engage in learning. In fact, the government has actually outlawed education because, like I say, ignorance is bliss. And when you start learning things, you learn about a lot of unpleasant situations in the world, and it informs your perspective so that you are not satisfied as you once were. Since education does not exist, that sense of objectivity cannot be developed. So that's both conditions of groupthink. As modern readers, we should be more terrified of Brave New World than 1984 because of how its technological advancements have allowed. So just think about it. Everyone's sitting in the audience right now who have a phone in their pocket with instant access to movies, shows, and movies, and other entertainment options that the internet offers. If you walk down the street, you'll see a lot of people with chewing up their pockets, sipping soft drinks, and in any street in a suburb, you'll find McDonald's or Burger King or any other fast food joint. And what's happened is that in the 19th and 20th centuries, mass manufacturing has led to this rapid commercialization, which has caused everything to become standardized. Everybody wants to get those same ideals. We abolished our local cultures and our local cuisines. or better food at better prices, because we fall along that same lines of the pursuit of flesh. So just like what we see in the real world, everything has become standardized, and we've conformed to this invisible standard in society without even intentionally trying to do so. So on the internet, it's actually really easy to see this in the form of this conformity in the form of internet originals. So here's a few buzzwords of 2019, just as an example. So there's USC, $250,000, Jesse Smollett, and most recently, James Charles. So what all of these figures have in common is that these internet originals in the form of media outlets, Facebook trends, YouTube comments, everybody just rises up and jumps onto the bandwagon, just slandering their images, trying to crucify these villains and convincing everyone else that you should hate because that's the right thing to do. So let's just take a step back from this scenario.
Okay, we're gonna stop there. And with that, a minute. It's not going. Okay. We're now for discussion, cancel culture. Okay, yeah. Too bad there's not a lot of people, but we can have one group in class and one group online. Talk about cancel culture. Is it social justice or a threat to free speech or a little bit of both? What does free speech even mean? Have you experienced personally a cancel culture? How does it affect society? And in broad terms, and anywhere you want to go with cancel culture. So go ahead, you have 5 minutes, 5 or 6. This morning they took a little bit more, so it depends. Go ahead, and you guys online, I'll put you in a breakout room. Let's start with you guys in here. What did you guys find to say? Have you experienced it?
So I haven't necessarily experienced cancel culture myself, but I have seen it happen to people. I have seen it happen to people at my school. It was kind of funny, but looking back on it, it's not very constructive, and I feel like I don't think it necessarily goes against free speech, because if it went against free speech, then people would be going to jail for the stuff they said in the past. But
you guys can come down and try to listen if you want.
But I think I don't know. I just feel like we should be holding people more accountable than just ruining their lives, because cancel culture used to be when people said something messed up on Twitter 4 years ago, that you would go to their future college and you would tell them not to accept them. That's what people would do. But I feel like if we just hold people accountable, then I feel like that's way more constructive.
So hold them accountable how? Instead of just ruining their reputation and make them go to jail?
No, no, I mean holding them accountable as in have, I don't know, I feel like it's better if that person learns from their mistakes and apologizes than for them to get their life ruined. I just feel like it's,
Okay, so let them apologize and move on and not ruin their life. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, just checking. Yeah. Cool. What else did you guys talk about? Anything else that you want to share?
I think that was pretty much it. It was a pretty agreeable discussion. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. All right, so their point is mainly that maybe we should actually forgive people and let them get back to living their life rather than just destroy it for whatever. So how about you guys? What did you guys talk about?
I agree with that to an extent, but I feel like we should at least hear them out, their point of view, before we make them apologize.
So we have to hear them out and then think about whether or not they need to apologize. Okay. So you're thinking that maybe people aren't getting a chance to defend themselves and just people are jumping on them without.
In my opinion, because most of the time people make bold statements just to get the attention. And then once they got the attention, I would like to make my point, because it's more of a bold statement. It's the attention grabber. Okay, you see me, because if they didn't do that, they might not necessarily get anywhere near the attention to discuss a topic that they would asking politely,
So you're thinking that people put themselves in the position to be canceled by saying something outrageous to get attention?
It's the same way, well, some of them, it's the same way news articles make bold titles like clickbait. And, if you look back at the Kaepernick situation, which I believe I'm a firm follower in Kaepernick, he obviously took the knee and stuff, and it was a very debateful thing to do. But had he not done that, he would not be anywhere near this level of popularity and attention to the problem at hand that he's trying to convey to the world.
Right, so he did something useful, but would you
He
say?
knew he
he's
was
been-
gonna get flack for it.
Yeah, but would you say that Kaepernick was canceled?
He was heavily attempted to get canceled,
Yeah,
that's for sure.
they did go after him.
Hard.
Still going after him, I guess, yeah. He took a risk and knew what he was doing.
He's not playing in the NFL anymore because of that mostly, so.
I guess that's about as canceled as you can get.
Yeah,
I mean, when you get down to it, because it's, getting, like I have that quote here, this is the measurable uptick since 2014 of campaigns to get people fired, disinvited, deplatformed, or otherwise punished for speech that is or would be protected by the First Amendment standards. That's cancel culture. So, yeah, I mean, and taking a knee is a type of speech in the sense that he did an action, right? So yeah, anything else? Have you guys experienced it in your personal lives?
not to that, like very small, like I was telling them, like in groups of friends, like some people will just team up against you to tick you off. But he said that's more of bullying, but I feel like cancel culture is another form of bullying as well.
Right, I think that's a good point. It is a form of bullying, a mass bullying, right?
Yeah.
But within a small friend group, that's just friend dynamics too. I mean,
Yeah,
sometimes people
that's true.
just, and sometimes it's not even bullying. It's just that you're not feeling, not everybody gets the airspace.
Yeah.
It's the domination of airspace, which is a different story. So, all right, that sounds good. So how about anything about how it affects society?
Oh, I think it usually affects society. It affects how you can get jobs. Because nowadays, people either have to delete their Twitter accounts from back then, or maybe delete certain explicit words from their account, because nowadays people will go back, try to find one bad tweet when you're like maybe 14, and it'll come back to haunt you when you're 24, and then a job might not hire you.
That is true, although I don't think that's quite the same as cancel culture. That's like, yeah, people are forgetting that Twitter is a public place.
Yeah.
But you raise a good question, should there be a statute of limitations on how much the stupid things you say on social media can affect you? And I think that, it's a different world now. When I grew up, there was no social media. There was a beautiful freedom. Nobody had cell phones, so we could be just as stupid as we wanted on the weekend and nobody was going to have a video going viral. It's a much freer, in that sense, much freer society before this online exposure of everything. So anyway, a lot to think of. I know you can't possibly cover this topic in like 5 or 10 or 20 hours, really. So let's move on. Why cancel culture? It's really an important part of social psychology. Cancel culture really gets to the heart of how an individual interacts with the group, right? It is a very important topic, but we're going to go on talk about more topics. Group polarization. So here's your textbook definition: tendency for members involved in a group discussion to take somewhat more extreme positions and suggest riskier actions than those who did not participate. What does that mean? That just means when a whole bunch of people agree with each other, get together, they go to extremes because they think they're right. They get feeling that, they exaggerate the bad parts of the out group, accentuate the good parts and what they think is right about the in group. So, right, it's kind of like they're not being exposed to different ideas. Whereas if you're not in that group, which is kind of, and nobody in this class, you guys didn't bring up echo chamber, which in my first class, when they talked about cancel culture, they talked about echo chambers, right? But it's the same kind of thing, that if you are limiting your exposure to one group, you're not going to kind of be able to hear that whole, the spectrum of opinions and options that are there. So people who are outside of that group discussion are less likely to become polarized in the same way. Individuation. I have the worst trouble with that word. De-individuation, right? Lessening of your personal identity and personal responsibility within the group. So for an extreme example of this, think about the Ku Klux Klan. They are literally de-individualized by putting on a mask. This provides anonymity But groups or crowds, even if they don't put on pointy hats, they provide a sense of anonymity in the sense that the individual is lost. The responsibility and identity of the individual is lost within the bigger group identity and responsibility of the crowd. So therefore, individuals feel less of a moral obligation to act morally or act it to benefit people who are in the outgroup, right? So very much happens in groups. Group behavior accentuates it. Okay, moving on. Anonymity, de-individuation, etc. So Stanford Prison Experiment. Who here has heard of the Stanford Prison Experiment? They've actually made a film about it. I actually have not seen the film, partly because I don't have time, but partly because I know the story. So you have here a variety of links, and we can look at them, but basically Philip Zimbardo in Stanford, actually I'm going to click on it because I keep forgetting the date. You would think that the second time today I'd remember the date, even if I forgot since last semester, but no. Let's go here. Okay. It's like 1973, so 1973. So basically Zimbardo was interested in, we all heard of how prison guards tend to get violent towards prisoners, et cetera, and so forth. So he was interested in whether it was a case of just some people have personality traits that cause them to act in an aggressive manner towards prisoners in this situation. He was studying that dynamic between prisoners and guards. Versus, was there something about the position of prison guard that made people more likely to be abusive, right? Which is the social psychological hypothesis that when we are put in certain situations, we are more likely to behave in one way or the other, right? So what he did was he brought in, he recruited participants, young men from the Palo Alto community, and brought them in, and they were, one would think they would be randomly assigned, but no, they were asked whether they prefer to be prisoners or guards of this experiment, right? And what happened, to make a long story short, is it got completely out of control. The guards were abusive, they were terrible without any instructions, really. Theoretically, Zimbardo said he gave them no instructions. It turns out he became overly involved with the experiment. It became a terrible abusive situation. One of the prisoners had to leave early, actually had kind of a nervous breakdown. He called off the experiment, stopped it early because it spiraled completely out of control. Okay, so this is one of the most famous experiments in psychology. You can read more about it here if you want. This shows what they actually arrested. So it was very realistic in the sense they actually arrested the prisoners in their homes in the community, took them back to the lab, underground lab, and had them in prison cells. And it was pretty horrific. Since then, it has to a certain extent been called into question, some of the results, just because of, and that's under this article, Time to Dismiss It, right? You can read about it there. Because of the extent to which Zimbardo himself got emotionally involved in the experiment. He wanted to show that putting people in the position of prison guards was damaging not only to the prisoners who are going to get beaten up and abused, but also to the people who are in that position of guards. And what he did was wrong and damaging. Nowadays, we could not do that kind of experiment in psychology because we cannot put participants at psychological risk. And both the prison guards and the prisoners will put at psychological risk, right? But we see this in real life. So when I first taught this class, it was like 2012, and we had an event in Iraq, Abu Ghraib. I don't know if you've heard of that. That was US military where it became very abusive of Iraqi prisoners. The same kind of situation. These are regular people put in an environment which brings out the worst in them, okay? So there's flaws in this experiment and so forth, but one of the lessons that we can learn from it is that we are very much, some people might have personality traits that make them gravitate to jobs such as prison guard, which are jobs where you're more likely to become aggressive or psychologically involved or in a wrong way and so forth. But it also shows that most of us our moral or immoral behavior depends on a certain extent on our environment. And those of us who look back at Nazi Germany and think, well, I would never have collaborated with Hitler. I would never have become a Nazi. Fact of the matter is, most people, most of the days of their life, all they want to do is put food on the table for their family, enjoy the love of their significant other, have a meaningful, fulfilling life as far as work and vacation and so forth. And when bad things happen, they just want to be able to ignore it and go on about their business. And until, you know, Hitler and his regime got so powerful, people were not in the position to say no. Most of us would, I mean, research shows that most of us would not be the people to stand against it, right? So important stuff. Let's go on to some more less bleak aspects of social psychology. This is what happens when other people are watching us. Two things can happen: social facilitation or social impairment. So social facilitation is just the positive impact that people watching can have. So when you feel like you got this, right? You're in control of this task, you've done it a lot. Having people watch you is going to make you put more effort into it because you're confident, you want to show off a little in a little sense, and that makes it, that's a social facilitation effect. However, what if it is a task that is a little challenging, that you're not so sure of? Then the fact that other people are watching, it's going to make you more nervous, right? And that's social impairment. You're going to do worse because the fact that people are watching and you're having a tough task, or a task that just is for some reason challenging at that moment. So that includes things like stage fright, or children who can become monsters in public and so forth. Okay, moving on. Social loafing, very similar. When people are working with others, sometimes they put less effort. Okay, I don't know, I've certainly experienced it. If I have a job to do, you know, a paper, a project, if it's myself, it just depends on me. I get down to work and I get it done. Whereas if I'm working in a group, I'm always like, oh, I don't want to do more than anybody else. Just to make sure that, you know, I don't want them to be free riding on me, and we're going to get that in a moment. So I'm like watching outside of my eyes, so to speak, making sure everybody pulls their weight, right? And because everybody's doing the same thing, you're less likely to get stuff done in an efficient manner. Most of us have experienced this, right? So those people who you're worried about taking advantage of you, those are free riders. Okay, people who are taking advantage of the system without pulling their weight, without doing their part. Free riders do not reciprocate, okay? So in evolutionary theory, the whole idea of, you know, we adapt and, you know, the fittest or the luckiest survive, and that things that are not adaptive don't work. Well, we think that works primarily on the gene level. Why do we not talk about groups? Like one group is more powerful than another? Because of free riders, okay? People, you know, altruism, doing something with no return, is something that doesn't make sense evolutionarily, right? And so if they're free riders, then the whole thing kind of falls apart. Greenbeards are organisms that carry traits that show that they're going to reciprocate, that they're not going to be free riders. Why is this important when we're talking about social psychology and groups? People worry about free riders all the time, okay? We worry about welfare and helping people out when they need it, because we're worrying that they're free riders, they're taking advantage of the system. Some people worry about providing a medical care for everybody because they're worried about free riders who don't pay their taxes or don't purchase insurance or don't get it through their employer. Most people get insurance through their employer, right? They don't think about the fact that when someone needs help and goes to the emergency room has to take care of them. And so we're paying for it anyway, but we're going to be paying more if they don't have any form of insurance because they're not being taken care of the entire time. Okay, but the fact that people worry about the whole free rider issue makes them incapable of seeing that the economic component of providing healthcare. So you have the emotional component. Maybe you think we have a moral duty to provide healthcare. Well, that depends on whether you believe that. So you can also believe that people have a moral duty to take care of themselves. But what's clear is that economically, it is more advantageous to the society to pay for everyone, make sure everyone stays healthy so they don't end up costing us more, right? because of obesity, lack of, all sorts of stuff. It's hard to see that when you're worried about people taking advantage of the system. So free riding, problem, right? A little more positive here, altruism. So pro-social behavior is just any behavior that helps society or other people, okay, for the benefit of others. Children are born pretty much pro-social. On the one hand, they don't know how to share when they're little, selfish and egotistical, and we talked about that in developmental, they see the world as, they're the center of their universe. On the other hand, toddlers are always wanting to help. If you ever observe toddlers like, mommy, let me do it, or they pick up things for people. Little children want to help. There's a lot of research now showing that even tiny babies tend to be pro-social, right? And pro-social behavior is any behavior, if it is a behavior to help others that is done with no expectation of reward and might even involve risk or harm, that's altruism. An altruistic act is something done purely to benefit another person, or it can be an animal for that matter, without any expectation of reward. Okay. And there are people who believe it doesn't exist, okay, right? But there's evidence that there are actually brain differences in people who are more willing to act altruistically. The temporal parietal junction, we talked about that before, it's up here in your brain up here at the top. And that's more active when there's more brain activity in that when people are having empathy for others or taking the perspective of others. Also, it's larger in those who make altruistic choices. So how might they measure this in the laboratory? So they take people in, they do a brain scan, they measure their TPJ. Then they might do something like this, and maybe they'll say, okay, we're gonna pay you $30 or $100 to come in and let us do a brain scan. We're studying whatever. And then after they've done the brain scan, they'll say, oh, we're gonna give you an Amazon gift card or whatever. Do you want to donate part of your $100 to charity? And they take how much people who donate more money to charity are considered more altruistic than those who do not. So they might do that. Another way they might measure altruism is, have some, as they leave the lab, maybe they have a Confederate there who needs help, or they're willing to help them, or they're willing to volunteer for another study. So that's what they consider operationalized altruism as in the lab, okay? In any case, there's a lot of interesting study. Another link, another TED Talk here, Peter Singer. Definitely worth seeing if you have the chance. But we're gonna keep going, okay, because we got a lot to go through. I want to get all the way to social cognition today. So we talked about conformity, okay? Conformity is doing what your group expects is the right thing to do, expects you to do, believes is the better way to believe, think, etc. What about compliance? Compliance is changing your behavior because other people ask you to, or suggest that it's a better thing to do. It's doing what you're requested. It's a submission response. And we're going to talk about some examples that are about really marketing, because that's what people are interested in. So consumer psychology studies the habits of consumers, people buying, including compliance. Why is compliance important? Because when you're trying to sell something, you want something to buy it. So when you agree to purchase something from another person, you're being compliant. Does that make sense? That's what compliance is, right? Good salesmen or saleswomen use compliance gaining techniques when they're selling things. So what do I mean by this? You guys might have heard of some of these. So for example, foot in the door technique, you ask for something small, and once they agree to that, you ask for something bigger, right? So, purchase this for a year, and once they've agreed to that, well, if you do it for 3 years, it's a little cheaper or whatever. Door in the face technique. Now, these are all from the days when salesmen went door to door, right? You drove all over the country. That's when you ask for something big and you get the door slammed on you, right? You get a big no, and then you ask for something smaller, okay? So why does this work? It's a norm of reciprocity. We just talked about how, people, free riders do not reciprocate. That's just doing something when when someone does something for you, you do something in return. The idea here is the fact that you've lowered your ask, they then owe you something, so they're more likely to give you that lower ask. Does that make sense? Now, if you've ever had to deal with people trying to sell you things, you might recognize this, and you will eventually find it in life. Low ball technique is you get a commitment and then raise the cost of commitment. Okay. What's the other thing when they switch things out on you? It's not, anyway, it's another salesman thing, right? So you reel them in and then you say, oh, well, now once, it's like a car. It's like, the Ford Lightning. I'm really interested in that electric truck, even though it probably can't, haul much. You say $40,000. Okay, gonna cost only $40,000 to get an electric truck. It turns out if you want that truck to actually be able to haul something bigger than a little tiny nothing, you got to pay almost $90,000 because you need like 2 engines and you need the whole towing package and etc. Okay, I don't know if they intended that way, but it really feels like lowball technique. And then finally, but that's not all. You make an offer, and then they add something else to make it look better. Okay, so it's just adding stuff until you reel people in. All these are about gaining compliance so people buy things, right? Any questions? Again, this is not conformity and it's not obedience. Okay, we're going to do obedience now. Conformity is just changing your behavior to match what is expected in your group. Compliance is just agreeing to an ask, right? When someone asks you to do something, you just agree, like they ask you to buy something. Obedience is doing what you're told by an authority figure, okay? Changing your behavior because someone in authority asks you to do it, okay? Now, we have another, we talked about what are the most famous studies in psychology are, or 2 already. We talked about Ash, 1956, with people agreeing with a clearly wrong, matching the length of the bars. We talked about Zimbardo's prison experiment. And now we're talking about Stanley Milgram's. So what Milgram did is he brought people into the lab and he told them that they were going to, he was studying how to make people learn faster. And he said, well, when you give people shocks when they get something wrong, they're going to have more incentive to learn. So he told the participants, you're going to act as a teacher, okay? And when someone gets a wrong answer, you got to administer a little shock. And he had them do that. And they actually did. And when they refused to, when they started to say, hey, I don't want to do this, he put pressure on them. Oh, no, this is for the good of science. Wouldn't you want to be able to learn faster? Wouldn't it be worth it? And so forth. And right here we have a picture of a little shock thingy. So one thing that you need to understand is people were not actually getting shocked, okay? There's a Confederate in there who's howling and saying, ow, 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 but they weren't getting shocked. However, the participants believed they were getting shocked. In those days, they didn't tell you things like nowadays, when you participate in research in psychology, you are told from the beginning that you may stop participating at any time, okay? Part of research ethics. In those days, they just brought them in and said, hey, you want to be a prison guard, or you want to do this, you want to do that, and gave them the impression that they couldn't easily stop. In fact, Milgram, and white lab coat, figure of authority, hey, no, don't stop now. This is really important for science. Or sometimes he just stood there and they still did it, right? So let's see. Let's have a look here. Can't remember what one of these was not working. Several of them weren't working this morning. Let's see if this was one of them.
In a unique period from the early 60s to the early 70s, a group of social scientists conducted a series of experiments examining the nature of human behavior and its relationship to social conventions and situations.
Setting and a lot of things can be done to me that I wouldn't allow in any other context. Dentist is about to, but an electric drill is not out. In this setting, I willingly expose my throat to a rifle razor blade.
Stanley Milgram, one of the most influential social psychologists of the time, was particularly fascinated with the dangers of group behavior and blind obedience to authority.
What is there in human nature that allows an individual to act without any restraints whatsoever, so that he can act inhumanely, harshly, severely, and in no way limited by feelings of compassion or conscience? These are quite.
Well, you might be better than that. Experiment requires you to continue. Any calls?
The experiments that Milgram and others conducted were controversial, and for ethical reasons, may never be conducted again. Yet the results of those experiments remain groundbreaking, profoundly revealing about the tensions between the individual and society, and increasingly relevant to contemporary life. In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an ink that would become a window into human cruelty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another. Milgram's original motive for the experiment was to understand the unthinkable, how the German people could permit the extermination of the Jews.
When I learned of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how was it possible, I asked myself, that ordinary people were courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? And there were some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seemed to provide a clue to this question. I wanted to say it was a little different, went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the Greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Would you open those and tell me which of you was which, please? All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so he gets some sort of punishment.
What inspired Milgram, I would say there are a number of factors. One of them is he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a mark in social psychology. And he wanted to, as he wrote to one friend, he wanted to come up with the boldest experiment they could think of.
You look your right sleeve, please. This electrode is connected to the shock generator in the next room. And this electrode paste is to provide a good contact to avoid any blister or burn. Do you have any questions now before we go to the next room?
About 2 years ago, I was at the Veterans Hospital in West State. And while there they detected a heart condition, nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shots, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, will you take the test and receive it for part of the shock generator, please?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as a teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly and fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you're instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts. And you increase the shock one step on each error.
Incorrect. You'll never get a shot for 105. Hard hit. Just how far can you go with this thing? As far as it's necessary. What do you mean as far as it's necessary?
Okay, this is a little squirrely. We're gonna stop here. So you guys get an idea of the setup. They even told that guy that heart condition, and they still did this. And the crazy thing, so we'll look at back at the PowerPoint. Maybe, okay, here. So sample script similar. So, you know, he'd say, ouch, let me get out of here. So the person wasn't even in there. They just thought he was, and it was all recorded because they were trying to maintain controls in the lab. But they, as far as they knew, this guy was screaming, yelling, in pain, and people still kept administering shocks. Okay, and even when they showed like they didn't want to, and he just keep going for the name of science, they kept doing it. So crazy thing. So attitudes. Let's try to get through the last little bit before tomorrow. I mean, before our next thing. We're going to keep social cognition for Wednesday. So attitude is the tendency to respond positively or negatively to something. All right, an attitude. It's a judgment about other things, people, things, situations, policies. We all know about attitudes, right? What we might not know is that there's three components to an attitude. There's the affective or emotional component. That's how you feel about it, right? There's what you do, your behavior. And then there's the thinking about it. So your emotional or affective attitude, the affective component on it, your attitude does not necessarily predict your behavior. In fact, attitudes are poor predictors of behavior, okay? Unless it's a really strong or very specific attitude towards something. So here's a little example. This is from your textbook. For example, your attitude towards country music. So whether or not you like it, that's the emotional part, the affective part. Then what you do about it. So do you buy CDs? Do you download music? Do you go to concerts? And then finally, how you think about it, okay? You think it's good stuff. Maybe you think about it in relation to the rest of your life. Like I spend more money on country music than on something that you should because it's really worthwhile. So it's just the thinking part of it, right? Your beliefs. So how do we form attitudes? First, we could just have direct contact, okay? We go to a concert. We hear country music on the radio, right? Direct instruction. Okay, you're told country music is good. Your parents tell you it's a good thing. Okay, your friends do. Interacting with other people hold the same attitude, okay? Or a different one, but you learn from them, right? You interact with people you think they're your people. Again, we go back to group behavior. You're more likely to adopt the attitudes of your own group, right? So interacting with people hold that attitude. That's why the whole echo chamber and polarization thing happens, is because you have contact with your group, which leads you to form attitudes in accordance to what they believe, right? Then there's vicarious conditioning, watching the actions and reactions of others to ideas, people, objects, things, etc. So just watching other people have attitudes can form your own attitude. So when we watch people suffering in a certain situation, we might develop a bad attitude toward that situation, right? A negative attitude. Okay, so this is what you need to do before Wednesday. This is about attitudes. The implicit attitude test, okay? Implicit association test. I think it was before called attitude. Okay, so this is just testing your implicit attitude. Your explicit things are things you are aware of and you exhibit. Implicit, the whole idea of this is to say, because people don't want to admit they're racist, we're going to see if we're going to try to find their implicit attitude towards different races by having them take this test. Now you can choose several. One is indeed, black, white, probably, or maybe different races. There's also like to old people versus young people, straight versus gay people, and so forth. Just pick one, or you can just many as you want, take it and then be ready to discuss it on Wednesday. This is a required discussion. Of course, the people who aren't here are never going to watch this, so they'll never learn. But if you can't come for some reason, please do it online. There's also a thing on the. So back to the lecture. This is all about attitudes. Persuasion. you try to change people's attitudes, right? Okay, that's the process by which is textbook definition. You try to change the belief, opinion, position, or course of action, etc., of another person through argument, pleading, explanation. There's a lot of persuasion techniques. Okay, you can persuade people by having them watch a film. Fiction is extremely persuasive. That's part of what I've actually studied in my own research. Sometimes it is easier to persuade someone if you don't hit them over the head with it. If you just introduce them to an idea through stories, through fun, right? So a little bit more on persuasion. What are the key elements? The source of the message. So people are more likely to be persuaded by experts, people in authority, people who are good looking, people who at least come across as honest, right? People who tell it like it is, right? People, I hate that term because telling it like it is often just telling it like you think it is. But people love to hear things like that because it sounds like they're promising the truth, right? So source of the message, really important. The message itself, content, is it believable? Okay. Is it believable? And then of course the audience. Depending on your target audience, your message is going to be different, and the source of the message, the vehicle of the message can be different, be differently effective. So, elaboration likelihood model. This is actually, anyway, they don't have the sites here. Anyway, this is also part of communication. There's psychology departments, there's also communication departments. This is really, persuasion is really important for communication, right? And people will either elaborate on the message or they won't. Will they think about it or not? Will they go further than just listening with a blank face, right? People who elaborate on it are easier to predict. Their behavior is easier to predict, okay? So there's two ways to try to persuade, or two techniques. You can use both of them in one persuasive message or in a series of persuasive methods. The first one is the simple route. Okay, that's going straight to the point. That's focusing on the message itself, the content. Keep it simple, keep it understandable, keep it something that makes sense. Okay, that's how people process a persuasive message. They process it by the message itself, but they also process the persuasive message through what's called peripheral route processing. So that's when you are processing the value or how you're going to elaborate or understand a persuasive message, not based on its content, but on how it's delivered. The source. Is it an expert? Is it a beautiful woman or a handsome man, right? How long it is. Is it, other things that aren't directly related to the content. Okay, more about attitudes. I've talked about cognitive dissonance before. That's what happens when what you believe does not align with your actions, right? Okay? When your behavior is not in accordance with what your attitudes are, okay? So I told you that, that emotional or feeling component doesn't always line up to the behavior component. People don't like cognitive dissonance. People try to lessen cognitive dissonance, okay? You can do it 3 ways. You can change the behavior. Okay, if you know it's wrong to steal and you're stealing things, you can stop stealing things. Okay, you can change your attitude by deciding it's okay to steal. After all, nobody really cares. Doesn't matter if I steal a lipstick or something, because this is a big corporation. They got too much money anyway. Okay, you can change your belief about how wrong it is to steal, or you can form a new attitude that connects the behavior and the conflicting attitude in a way that rationalizes. You guys know what rationalizing an action is, okay? Sometimes to get rid of that cognitive dissonance, we rationalize, and we do this with the aid of a new attitude, right? So I talked about this, like, it happens all the time, okay? If you end up not being able to take the job, get a job you really want, you get one you don't like as well, and in the end, you're gonna like it better because you're gonna look back and say it's better anyway because it's closer to home. That's how we deal with cognitive dissonance all the time, for big things and little, right? So here's an example. There's been a lot of research on this. This is a fun one. So after completing a boring task, some participants will pay $1 and some $20, okay, to convince others waiting to do the same task. The task was interesting and fun. Okay, then after they were paid or not, right, they were then asked to rate the task for how boring or interesting it was. Okay, the really interesting thing is that the people who were paid $1 rated it most positively, right? Why would this, can anyone think this might be true? Think about cognitive dissonance. Think about how you don't want to like give away your time for free. Okay, so what they're doing is a thing of, geez, man, I did this and they're only paying me $1, so it must have been interesting, otherwise I wouldn't have done it, right? So it's basically a way to get yourself to believe it's not such a waste. Oh, Zoom just died on me. That's really weird. Anyway, I guess it ended there. Okay, so fortunately, this is the end pretty much, especially the end, because for some reason, something weird happened on Zoom. Oh well. Okay, so any questions? So we've covered a lot of topics. Yeah, go ahead.
For the assignment that we have to do, if we come to class, do we also have to post on
No, no, you don't. You just have to do it if you don't come to class. And it's not going to take too much time unless you go wild and crazy and want to do all of them. Okay, it does take, you know, a little bit of time. I don't remember, like 5 minutes, but yeah. It'll be here in class. Oh, you, because you're probably gonna be late. Yeah, I know. No, we will, I will wait. I will wait. Okay, I'll wait. And if you happen to miss class, you can just do it also online. But it's more fun if you just talk and don't have to type it out. So I know this is tons of material. There's no way you can properly cover group behavior even in one day, but at least you guys have a sense of what's going on and how important it is that we actually think about these things. And as I said, the very first day of class, you know, question, think critically. And sometimes the most important time to think critically is when we ourselves are doing something, when we're feeling like we're in agreement with our group, when someone's trying to sell us something and we're wanting to buy it. Why are we wanting to buy it? Why are we wanting to do what these people are telling us to do? You know, why do I feel more like doing what these people ask me to do and not what these people ask me to do? Like, who's who and who's, you know, who's the authority? How is this person trying to sell us? People who are good salesmen are so good. They're not only good at all that foot in the door and selling, they're good at the giving the message, persuading you, you know, and convincing you they're the expert. There's a lot of people on, one of the things about social media and our online environment now is that, oh my goodness, there are so many people who are good at selling themselves. I wish I was. I wouldn't be working here if I could have a YouTube channel, make millions of dollars. The fact of the matter is I'm bad at it. But just think, when you get exposed to people, think about what they're trying to sell you. Most people are trying to sell you something, pretty much. So anyway, all right, I'll see you Wednesday, and we will very also quickly cover social cognition, aggression, and attraction. And I don't know what happened to Zoom. Something weird. Stop recording.